The A through F school ratings for 2015, a transition year. The A through F school rating system was established with Act 696 of 2013. I'm going to review a few excerpts from the law, specifically Section 615-2101. The school rating system is part of the annual reports for schools. The law states that the department shall provide information regarding performance of students in educational programs, and the department shall designate one school performance category for each school based on, at a minimum, these three things: student academic performance on state-mandated assessments, student growth based on state-mandated assessments, and for a secondary school, the school's graduation rate. In Section 615-2105, it states that each parent or guardian is entitled to an easy-to-read written report describing the designation or rating of the school in which his or her child is enrolled. And this is accomplished through that single grade of A through F. An A through F school rating can be assigned in one of two ways: as prescribed in Section 2105, which is based on the ESEA flexibility status, or as prescribed in rules adopted by the State Board of Education, as specified in Section 615-2106. The State Board of Education in 2014 approved the following components for determining an overall score, which would then be translated into the A through F school rating. Those four components included a performance score, an improvement score, a graduation rate score for secondary schools, and an achievement gap adjustment. The points from each of the components were then summed to an overall score. Schools were then assigned an A through F rating based on the total points that were earned out of 300 points. If a school earned 90% of the points, they were assigned an A. If the school earned 80 to 89% of the points, they were assigned a B. If the school earned 70 to 79% of points, they were given a grade of C. And if the school earned 60% of the points through 69%, the school was assigned a grade of D. When schools earned less than 60%, they were assigned a grade of F. Why change the rules for 2015? Well, there are several reasons. There were new assessments in 2015. Prior to 2015, students in the state of Arkansas took the Arkansas benchmark or end of course exams. In 2015, students took the PARCC exam or the NCSEC exam. These were more rigorous tests of more rigorous standards. And these tests also established new performance levels. The PARCC, for example, has 5 levels of performance, and the NCSEC has 4 levels of performance. Let's compare that to last year, the 2014 school year. The Arkansas benchmark exam and end of course exams had only 4 levels of performance, whereas the alternate portfolio assessments, which were given to students with significant cognitive disabilities, had 5 levels of performance, whereas the NCSEC, given in 2015, only had 4 levels. So this required that the rules change in order to update the points earned in the weighted performance section of the A through F school rating. In addition, the improvement score could no longer be calculated in the same way. Annual performance and growth targets in 2014 were based on the previous assessment, and there was no baseline to set appropriate targets for 2015. So the improvement section of the school rating system needed to change. Finally, there was feedback from stakeholders. The Department of Education and others heard from stakeholders the desire to have credit for additional indicators. The rules for 2015 were put before the State Board of Education as an emergency rule. They were approved in February, and then they were put before the legislative review committees, and they were approved by these committees in March. The changes to the components for 2015 are available in Appendix A of the emergency rule, which is available at the arkansased.gov website under Current Rules. And if you just Google or search under Current Rules, School Ratings, you will be taken directly to the emergency rule. Let's take a look at the changes that you're going to see for 2015. And I'll give you page references for the document, Appendix A, so that you can look these up in the document. On page 2 of Appendix A, there are changes detailed for the performance score. In weighted performance, students last year earned points based on the 4 performance levels. This year, the performance score had to be adjusted to accommodate the 5 park performance levels. And then, because NICSIC was only 4 performance levels, those had to be crosswalked so that they were substantively similar in terms of how points were awarded. In addition, the improvement score is replaced by a growth score for the school, and this is described in detail on pages 3 and 4 of Appendix A. The value-added growth score is a growth model that works over the test transitions. The graduation rate, which is described on page 5 of Appendix A, did not change. That component is the same. The achievement gap adjustment on page 5 is also the same, except for one small difference. The new tests necessitated updating the cut points for the gap adjustment. Finally, a new element this year is detailed on page 6, and this is called the challenge points. Last year, A through F rating components for the performance score allowed schools to earn up to 125 points for performance, and that is still true in 2015. Last year, a below basic student earned a school 0 points per student. A basic student earned the school 1/4 point per student. A proficient student earned the school 1 point, and then an advanced student earned the school 1 1/4 points. This year, you can see that the points awarded for performance are different based on the 5 levels of PARC, and then the NICSIC performance levels crosswalk to the 5 levels of PARC. It's still true that when students are in the very bottom performance level, they do not earn any points. In NICSIC, because it was only 4 performance levels, and because of some unique qualities to the scaling of that test, students who earned a score of 1200, which was a scale score, received 0 points for that score as a performance level 1 student, because that score was equal to a raw score of 0. At performance level 2 on PARC, students who partially met the standards, schools in 2015 earned half a point for students in this category, compared to only 1/4 point last year if they were basic. The equivalent of that, the crosswalk of that on NICSIC, is a student at performance level 1 where the scale score was greater than 1200 or more than a 0 score. Those students earned a half a point. For performance level 3, students earned 3/4 point or 0.75. On the NICSIC, if they had a performance level of 2, which was approaching the standard, they also earned 0.75, which is 3/4 point. Students meeting the grade level standards on PARC were at level 4. Those students earn a point. On the NICSIC, grade level standards and meeting grade level standards was represented by performance level of 3, and those students also earn a point of 1. When we get into the exceeding category, in the categories in both the NICSIC and the PARC that represent students exceeding grade level standards, there's a slight change in 2015. And this change is to address the issue that a school could continue to have students who don't make progress at the bottom in performance level 1 and earn enough points from performance level 5 to counteract that. And so this was modified so that that compensation of level 5 for level 1 only occurs if the number of students in level 5 is greater than the number of students in level 1. When that's the case, then for every student, for the number of students more in level 5 than in level 1, each of those students earns 1 1/4 points. for the number of students equal to in level 5 equal to the number in level 1, you earn 1 point per student. That's the change in weighted performance. The improvement score has also changed. Remember, last year, the improvement score allowed schools to earn 55 to 95 points. It was based on meeting annual targets for improvement using either performance in the school or growth of the students in the school for math, literacy, and graduation rate. Again, the improvement targets were based on the old test data and did not translate to the new test data. It was not appropriate to apply those targets to the new scores. And so a student growth model, a value-added student growth model, was selected to replace the improvement score. A student growth model, at its basic, describes the change in student achievement over time. But student growth models describe that change in different ways. There are different models that describe different types of change in achievement over time. That student growth model becomes value-added when the student's growth is attributed to a particular entity, such as a school, in this example. It's important to know that different growth models answer different questions about the change in student achievement. And so, in evaluating different growth models for this component of the A through F system, a conversation that has been taking place among stakeholders for the past 3 years about student growth has determined that there are advantages and disadvantages to the different models based on how those models answer questions about the change in student achievement. There has been a larger conversation going on, and it's been going on over the course of 3 years, with stakeholders representing superintendents, principals, teachers, and other advocacy groups engaged in a conversation about what is a growth model that can be used, that can take the place of the growth model that was being used with the old benchmark exam, because that was tied to the test. And now we have a new test and we need a model that isn't tied to the old test. Through that conversation, it was determined that a longitudinal student growth model, where value-added scores based on this model could be used at the school level and also at other levels of aggregation to help understand and inform educators on the progress of students and the change in their achievement over time. The longitudinal student growth model and value-added model included in the A through F rating system answers the question, how much did you grow compared to how much we thought you were going to grow based on what we know about you. The longitudinal growth model results in scores that are based on whether or not where we think a student is going to be, which is based on a prediction that looks back at as many years of a student's score history as possible. Based on as many years of a student's score history, what can we expect the student to achieve this year? How will their performance have changed from last year to this year based on how the student has performed over a number of years? The more years that we include, the more precise that expected score will be. Then we take the student's actual score and compare it to the expected score. And we subtract the expected score from the actual score. So if the actual score is the same as the expected score, then that student is scoring right at that 0. So values for student growth that are right around 0 basically mean that the student is making the growth that's expected for them based on what we've known they've done over the course of several years before. If the student's actual score is higher than what we expected, then that results in positive values, meaning that the student has grown more than expected, which means there was a value added to that student through his education. And then when the actual score is less than what's expected, that results in negative values. Well, how does that look on a chart? Let's take a look at a student who has scores from grades 3 through grade 8. And in grade 3 started where most third grade students started. Notice that for this student, from 3rd to 4th grade, this student had pretty steep growth. this student did very well from 3rd to 4th grade, but from 4th to 5th grade, this student flattened out and almost fell just a little bit. But then the next year the student had increased rate of growth, and then from 6th to 7th grade the student had not as rapid of an increase in achievement, a little bit more subtle. We take all of that information, and using that information we predict where we would expect the student would be for the current year. So in this case, for this student, it's grade 8. And that expectation is represented here by the light blue dot above grade 8. So that's where we would expect the student to be. If the student's actual score is at their expected score, we say the student made a year of expected growth. If the student's in the green area, their score is actually somewhere above what we expected, we say they made more than an expected year of growth. And if their score is a little less than expected, we say that they made less than a year of expected growth. There's been some question and confusion as the stakeholders have worked through understanding this model, and that resulted in this example. This is an example of a student, a fictional student named Tommy, who has scores from 1st and 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th grade. And what we're doing is we're trying to figure out by 6th grade, did the student meet expected growth? And if we were only looking at one prior year score, you could see that each year the student's expectations would really be varied. And that doesn't lead to consistent information over time, and it doesn't allow your prediction, your expectation, to be very precise. But when we take the information from grade 1, the information from grade 2, the information from grade 3 and 4 and 5, and we put that information together, the red dashed line represents our expectation from grade 5 to grade 6. And you can see that the student is right on expectation. If we had only created a trajectory from an early score or the year before, we might not get such a precise expected score. How do we go from a student growth score to a school growth score? School growth scores are also value-added scores, and they're the average of students' growth scores in math and English language arts. The school value-added score answers the question, on average, did students in this school meet, exceed, or not meet expected growth? We get that information. The value ranges from a negative number to 0 to a slight positive number. In order to include that in the school rating system, I need to remind you that the points that are represented in the school rating system last year for improvement ranged from 55 to 95. So we need a way to transform that school average value-added score so that it can be on a scale that works in the school rating system. Remember, last year there were 300 points possible, and schools could earn up to 95 of those points in growth. So we need to transform that scale. In doing so, you have to do a little bit of work to understand what we would consider in terms of a value for transforming that expected growth to the grading scale. So we asked stakeholders, what letter or number grade would you earn if students in your school, on average, met their expected growth? So if, on average, kids in your school met expected growth, what is the grade that you think you should earn? And the consensus came back that it needed to be somewhere between a middle C and a middle B. So expected growth was valued not at the 70, what we used to consider the low average. It really was between a middle C and a middle B. And so in the transformation, we take your value-added score, and every school starts with a low B, which is the middle, between a middle B and a middle C. So every school starts with 80.85 points. That's a low B. And what happens is, based on whether you have a school value-added score that's positive or negative, when we transform it onto the scale, that positive or negative value is multiplied by 35 and then added to the 80.85. So schools who on average made less than expected growth are going to have a score lower than 80.85. And schools that have more than expected growth are going to have a school growth score higher than 80.85. The range of growth scores for A through F in 2015, because of this transition year and because it's important that everybody grow to understand the information, the lowest growth score given to a school is a 70, and the highest is the same as last year, a 95. So what this means is the lowest that growth in 2015, the lowest value it can contribute to the overall school rating is similar to the value of a low C. The graduation rate and gap adjustment, as I mentioned earlier, the graduation rate equals the graduation score points, and the achievement gap was only updated for the cut points. Everything else remains the same, and the graduation rate gap cut points remain the same. Challenge points is something new. It's the first foray into including additional points toward the overall school rating. There were stakeholder meetings that were convened to talk about how do we identify additional indicators that could be included in the A through F school rating. And these are being discussed as excellence points. And those meetings continue to be in progress. For 2015, because of timing and a few other limitations, the options for what could be included and added in are a little more limited. Number one, because the time needed to gather stakeholder input on the additional indicators and make sure that it's representative across all levels of schools was not sufficient to get that information vetted, studied, and appropriately added into the model. In addition to that, many of the suggestions either were not part of existing data collection, or if they were part of existing data collection, there's work that needs to be done to make sure that the way that those components can come together is comparable. Some of the data that were suggested are not necessarily collected in a way that ensures quality for use in something like the school A through F rating system. And so it was determined that when things are added through these additional indicators, there needs to be some time so that schools will know that these are going to become components and they can have extra attention to the quality of those indicators. And so challenge points were developed in order to find a situation that could apply across the board where everybody would have a chance to earn extra points that didn't involve collecting new data. The challenge points provide schools with an opportunity to earn extra points for outperforming current year expectations. Schools earn extra points for 2015 school performance when student achievement in the school exceeds the expected achievement when you consider school's level of challenge. That level of challenge is represented by the percent of students economically disadvantaged. Schools can receive 3 challenge points for math and or English language arts if the school has a positive difference that is in the top 25% or the top quartile among all schools. So if their expectation is at one level and their actual performance is at a higher level, that results in a positive difference. And if that difference is high enough, then they earn 3 points. If they're in the third quartile, the next 25%, then they earn 2 challenge points. Let's look at this on a chart so it makes more sense. Across the bottom, you have the poverty rate of all schools in Arkansas going from 0 to 100. And then along the y-axis, you have the percent of students meeting the ELA standards. So percent of students meeting level 4 and 5 on PARCC and levels 3 and 4 on NCSEC. The little crosses, the little plus signs on the chart represent the schools in Arkansas, and this is all the schools in Arkansas. The red line represents the expected performance line. So for all the schools in Arkansas, based on their poverty, that red line shows you what would have been expected given their level of poverty or challenge. If you're above the red line, if you land in this green rectangle, then you're going to earn challenge points that will be added onto your school rating. If you're above the dashed blue line, then you're in the top quartile. If you're between the red and the blue line, you're in the third quartile. So above the blue is 3 points, between the red and the blue are 2 points. And this is what it looks like in math. And you can see that there are schools at all ends of the poverty spectrum earning challenge points. Then the overall score is calculated, and that overall score is calculated similarly to last year. The only difference is that challenge points are added to the score itself, so that allows you to get extra additional points. And then the schools without graduation rates, because they don't have that third component, remember, just like last year, they have the 1.5 multiplier. So if I'm an elementary or a middle school and I just have weighted performance and I just have growth, then I look at my weighted performance and any gap adjustment, I multiply that by 1.5. I look at growth, I multiply that by 1.5. I add those two products together, and then I add in the challenge points from math and or English language arts. And that gives me an overall score that is then on the scale of 300 points. But again, think about it in terms of the percentage of points possible. Literally, an A means that schools earned 90% or more of the points available. A grade of B means that schools earned 80 to 89% of the points, and so on.